I hail from rural roots, a country boy through and through. Following my completion of junior college, I tied the knot with my high school sweetheart, Jody. Yet, Jody harbored a longing for the glitz and glamour of high society. She pored over the society pages, subscribed to every glossy magazine chronicling the lives of the elite, and even perused automobile magazines during dentist visits, familiarizing herself with luxury cars. She possessed an acute awareness of designers and their fashion lines, yearning for a life beyond our means. In an attempt to accommodate her desires, I secured a position at a posh feed store in Omaha catering to the yuppie clientele. This move brought us closer to urban amenities while allowing me to pursue my passion. I excelled in my role, providing exceptional service to customers and earning flexible working hours as a result. Initially content with city living, Jody eventually sought employment herself, necessitating daycare for our children. Despite this, they adapted well to their new routine. Jody found employment with a medical device firm, relishing the office environment, which afforded her opportunities to dress up and interact with non-farming individuals. As she delved deeper into her career, her focus shifted away from our family life. I found myself shouldering the majority of childcare responsibilities, from drop-offs and pickups to meal preparation and housekeeping, while she meticulously tended to her wardrobe and appearance. We had diligently squirreled away savings each month with the goal of eventually purchasing our own feed store. However, despite our dual incomes, our savings dwindled. Daycare expenses accounted for some of the drain, but the bulk vanished on beauty treatments, salon visits, and designer clothing. I struggled to comprehend how our financial situation had deteriorated despite our increased earnings. Attempts to broach the subject with Jody were met with defensiveness and hostility, prompting me to create a separate savings account to safeguard our future goals. She began putting in extra hours at work, engaging in secretive phone conversations, and showing less interest in our intimate moments. Her desire for a flashy new car and talk of cosmetic surgery hinted at a desire for something beyond our marriage. It was evident to me that she was involved in an affair. Though I might be considered a simple man from the countryside, I wasn't naive. At this juncture, salvaging the marriage wasn't my priority. I simply wanted to address the situation and move forward before it escalated further. Pinpointing the exact details was challenging since I wasn't acquainted with her colleagues, but my gut told me the affair, if any, was likely with someone from her workplace. I had the fortune of working alongside a couple of reliable fellows. While they lacked formal education, their work ethic was admirable. Despite my managerial role, I never exploited my authority. The work flowed smoothly as everyone understood their responsibilities and cooperated seamlessly. This approach fostered a strong bond, and Chad and Daniel would prove to be invaluable allies in my endeavor. I couldn't ignore the pattern. Every Wednesday, Jody dressed to the nines, donning her fanciest lingerie and outfits, clearly putting extra effort into her appearance for work. Sensing an opportunity, I confided in my colleagues, who graciously offered to cover my responsibilities on those days. Parking near the entrance of the Russell Medical Plant, I used the time to catch up on technical reading while keeping a watchful eye. Around 11 a.m., my suspicions were confirmed when Jody emerged from the building and headed for her car. Following her wasn't difficult, and within minutes she parked at the Holiday Inn, choosing a secluded spot far from prying eyes. Soon after, a stranger in a red Lexus arrived and parked at the opposite end of the lot. When they both headed towards room 125 and disappeared inside, my heart sank, confirming my worst fears. Feeling a mixture of disappointment and queasiness, I realized I needed a plan. Returning to work, I resolved to take my time strategizing my next move. Before leaving the parking lot, however, a surge of frustration prompted me to sabotage her car, snipping 2 of her valve stems with my baling wire cutters. In hindsight, I should have considered targeting his vehicle as well, but anger clouded my judgment at the moment. The remainder of the day crept by at an agonizing pace. After work, I fetched the kids, prepared dinner, and waited for her to return home. When she finally did, I casually inquired about her day, to which she mentioned having a flat tire. Apparently, one of her coworkers had kindly changed it for her. We left the matter at that, without further discussion. The following morning, after dropping the boys off at daycare, I swung by the plant. It didn't take me long to spot the red Lexus, conveniently parked in a reserved spot with a sign bearing the name Felix Brooks, Distribution Manager. I made a note of it. Through Chad's wife, who worked in the personnel department at Russell, I swiftly gathered intel on Felix. It turned out he was already married and had a history of misconduct, including inappropriate behavior towards a colleague and financial discrepancies in his expense reports. Armed with his personal details, from his address to his social security number, I couldn't yet fathom what I'd do with the information. By evening, Chad, Daniel, and I had completed a productive day's work, allowing us to unwind with a beer before I had to fetch the kids. While I tried to maintain a composed and rational outlook, beneath the surface, my anger simmered, exacerbated by moments of silent tears. I felt broken, incapable of repairing the damage inflicted by Jody's betrayal. Enduring her presence became increasingly intolerable. I longed for closure, for an end to the torment. The following day brought another stroke of luck when I recalled that one of my valued clients, Batty Russell, happened to be the wife of the president of Russell Medical Company. While I hadn't met him, Batty and I shared a great rapport. I made a conscious effort to be extra cordial with Batty, contemplating whether I could leverage our relationship to my advantage when her daughter Karen approached us. Karen, in her final year of vet school, joined our conversation as Batty headed to the barn for some chores. We ended up chatting for about an hour, and I found myself enjoying her company, albeit with a tinge of guilt that quickly dissipated after I left. During the weekend, I spent some time in the garage working on a project. Using my welding skills, I fashioned a small piece of flat steel and affixed 4 sharp points to it, crafted from concrete nails for maximum hardness. The resulting plate, measuring about 6 by 6 inches, would serve as my initial tool for exacting revenge through harassment. I crossed paths with Batty again on Tuesday, feeling somewhat downcast as I unloaded the order, my usual jovial demeanor conspicuously absent. My subdued mood didn't escape her notice, piquing her curiosity. "Bob, what's weighing on your mind today? You seem a bit down," Batty inquired, her concern evident in her voice. "I've got some personal issues, Batty." "Sorry, I'm not the best company today," I responded, my mood dampened by the weight of my troubles. "Let's grab some coffee and you can talk to me about it," she suggested, leading the way back to her impeccably designed kitchen, reminiscent of a magazine spread with its stainless steel and granite accents. I couldn't help but think how much Jody would adore it. Seated at the table, Batty placed the coffee down and leaned in, prompting me to open up. "Well, how can you help me, Batty?" I hesitated, unsure of whether I wanted to burden her with my problems. "I won't know unless you tell me what's going on," she reassured me. Reluctantly, I began to share my concerns. My wife, Jody, works at Russell Medical, and I suspect she's being pressured into a relationship with one of her superiors, but I can't prove anything. "Why do you think this is happening?" Batty inquired, her brow furrowing in concern. "It's mostly little things, but last week I caught them together at the Holiday Inn. Jody doesn't know I know, and I'm at a loss for how to broach the subject. I don't know if she's being coerced or if it's something she wants. Our family life has suffered. She seems indifferent towards the children and me. The secrecy is what truly bothers me," I confessed, the weight of the situation heavy on my shoulders. "Who is this man?" Batty asked, her tone firm. "I believe his name is Felix Brooks. I'm not sure if Jody works directly under him or in a different department. I've never met him." "Would you like me to look into it?" Batty offered, her voice filled with determination. After a moment's hesitation, I nodded. "If you think there's a discreet way to handle it, I'd appreciate your help. I don't want to cause a scene." "All right, let me see what I can do. I'll bring those oats next Thursday," Batty promised, her resolve evident. Grateful for her assistance, I thanked her before preparing to leave. "Where's Karen?" I inquired as an afterthought. "She's away at school, but she'll be home this weekend. Why don't you bring the boys up so she can meet them?" Batty suggested with a smile. As I left, a glimmer of hope flickered within me. Perhaps things would turn out better than I dared to hope. Perhaps this weekend would mark the beginning of a brighter chapter for me and the boys. The following morning, as rain poured down relentlessly, Jody meticulously prepared for her routine yet seemingly significant day. I observed silently, holding back any remarks as I dropped the kids off at the daycare center before heading to work. My colleagues had everything arranged to cover my morning shifts. Chad would utilize my truck to handle deliveries and log entries, with me providing my initials upon my return. Meanwhile, Daniel arrived with his cousin's van, equipped with a floor jack loaded with our modified steel plate. After ensuring all the necessary arrangements were in place, they set off for their respective tasks, leaving me to make my way to the Holiday Inn. True to form, Jody arrived promptly and parked in her usual spot, followed closely by Felix. Once they disappeared into the room, I allowed them a brief moment to settle in. Despite the pouring rain, I swiftly retrieved the jack from the van and maneuvered it towards Felix's car. With practiced efficiency, I positioned the jack under his engine block and raised it, the concrete nails piercing the oil pan with a satisfying pop. Swiftly moving to the rear of the Lexus, I repeated the process, this time puncturing the fuel tank. Oil and gasoline began to spill out as I returned the jack to the van, the entire operation completed in under a minute. Next, I made my way to Jody's car, cutting slices into 2 valve stems as I had done before. Satisfied with my actions, I prepared to depart. As I drove past Felix's now compromised vehicle, I casually flicked a lit cigarette out the window before speeding away. In my rearview mirror, I caught sight of flames erupting from the car, followed by the deafening sound of an explosion. Despite the chaos, a sense of relief washed over me. Joni arrived home from work later than usual, skipping dinner and heading straight to bed. I spent some quality time with the boys, helping them with their evening routine before tucking them in. That night, I opted to sleep on the couch. The next morning, as I got the boys ready for daycare and we went about our morning routine, Jody remained in bed, showing no signs of getting up or engaging in conversation. Her absence at the breakfast table went unaddressed, and as we left for the day, I noted her car was conspicuously absent from the driveway. Around 9 a.m., just as we finished loading up the trucks, Lieutenant Jack Clark paid me a visit. Despite his friendly demeanor, his unexpected appearance piqued my curiosity. "Can you tell me about your schedule yesterday?" he inquired. "It was a typical day, regular deliveries, nothing out of the ordinary. Why do you ask?" I responded, puzzled by his line of questioning. Clark requested details about my whereabouts around noon, prompting me to retrieve the delivery logs from the previous day. As I laid them out before him, detailing each stop with its corresponding time and my initials, a faint smirk appeared on his face. "That's quite a meticulous log you've got there. Do you maintain this level of detail every day?" he remarked, a hint of amusement in his tone. "Would you like to review the logs for the past month?" I offered, unsure of where this conversation was leading. He declined, his smile lingering as he finally revealed the reason for his visit. There was a vehicle damaged at the Holiday Inn in East Oman yesterday, and we're trying to ascertain if anyone had any knowledge of the incident. "Why approach me?" I questioned, sensing a connection to Jody's absence. "Well, another vehicle parked nearby had 2 valve stems cut, coincidentally belonging to your wife's car. We're exploring if there's any correlation," he explained, shedding light on the situation. His words left me with a mixture of concern and uncertainty, wondering about the implications of Jody's involvement in the incident. Firstly, I'm baffled as to why my wife's car was at the Holiday Inn parking lot. Secondly, what does that have to do with the damaged car? I questioned, trying to make sense of the situation. The damaged vehicle belonged to a colleague she had a lunch meeting with. Apparently, they were meeting some company clients at the hotel, and the incident occurred during their lunch, Lieutenant Clark explained, shedding light on the circumstances. "Did you speak to the people they dined with?" I inquired, hoping for some clarity. "No, unfortunately, they couldn't recall their names," Clark responded. "Are we going to have an honest conversation here, or are we going to dance around the issue?" I pressed, feeling the need for straightforwardness. He leaned back in his chair, a small smile playing on his lips. "Do you happen to know a man named Felix Brooks?" "I've never crossed paths with the man, I can assure you of that," I replied earnestly. "I believe you," Clark said, nodding. "I prefer not to meddle in domestic matters, and I hope I won't need to return. Here's my card. Give me a call if anything else comes up, all right?" We shook hands, and he offered an apology. "I'm sorry for bringing this to your attention. If there's anything I can do to assist, don't hesitate to reach out." "Thank you, but you didn't really provide me with any new information," I noted as he walked away. "Put the pieces together," he called back over his shoulder. Later that day, upon returning home from work with the kids, I noticed Jody's car in the driveway. She appeared casually dressed and had dinner prepared. She mentioned feeling unwell and calling in sick, but made no mention of the previous day's events. I opted not to broach the subject either. As she retired to bed early, I took care of the boys once again before settling on the couch for the night. The next day, as I departed with the boys for daycare, Jody was already bustling about, preparing for work. After dropping the boys off, I made a stop at the doctor's office to request a check for STDs. The rest of the day proceeded as usual for a Friday. Upon returning home, Jody was once again present. During dinner, I casually mentioned my plan to take the boys to spend the following day at one of my customers' farms. While extending the invitation to Jody, I anticipated her inevitable decline. As expected, she cited some shopping she had in mind, and I didn't press the matter further. Whether it was shopping or a clandestine rendezvous, the outcome remained unchanged. Saturday, spent at the Russells' ranch with Karen and the boys, was a delight. We reveled in a day filled with laughter and joy, with Batty's delicious lunch adding to the festivities. Karen bonded effortlessly with the boys, and they reciprocated her affection wholeheartedly. However, Mr. Russell's absence meant I still hadn't had the opportunity to meet him. Batty made no reference to our previous conversation, and it seemed Karen was oblivious to any underlying tension. It pained me to bid farewell and return home, but alas, all good things must come to an end. Back at home, Jody displayed no interest in our day's adventures. Her indifference was palpable as the boys attempted to share their excitement with her, only to be met with disinterest. Eventually, they ceased their efforts. She did inquire about my sleeping arrangements, noting my absence from the bed. I concocted a vague excuse about work-related sleep troubles, which seemed to satisfy her curiosity. And with that, the matter was laid to rest, never to be broached again. The following week proceeded without any remarkable events. On her birthday, I observed that she hadn't made any special arrangements, leading me to presume that our planned rendezvous for the day had been called off. That suited me fine, as I had a backlog of work to tackle. I took the opportunity to visit a divorce attorney recommended to me, who provided me with informative handouts and brochures, including some intriguing fill-in-the-blank forms. Everything resumed its usual routine until the next Wednesday. On that day, she began with her usual morning routine, followed by meticulously styling her hair. She adorned herself in alluring new black lingerie, applied a fresh fragrance, and even appeared to be wearing new shoes. Careful not to betray my curiosity, I swiftly departed with the boys, anticipating a planned outing. After dropping them off, I discreetly swung by the workplace and noted a shiny new Mercedes SL occupying his parking spot. I hastily recorded the license plate number before rushing back to my tasks. The excitement among my colleagues mirrored my own. We expedited the morning deliveries and manipulated the logs once again, despite suspecting that Jack Clark could see through our facade. Nevertheless, we persisted. We enjoyed an extended and leisurely lunch break. While Chad continued with deliveries, Daniel procured 2 sizable bottles of hydrochloric acid from the swimming pool supply store. Meanwhile, I opted to spend my lunch break with Jack Clark. Jack shot me a puzzled glance as I entered his office bearing pulled pork sandwiches, fries, and a couple of Cokes. Offering a cheerful greeting, I settled into the seat opposite him. His knowing smile hinted that he sensed something was amiss. I casually suggested we share lunch and catch up on the latest developments in the car damage case, realizing I needed to keep him occupied for a couple of hours. It promised to be an extended meal indeed. While I engaged in small talk with Jack, Daniel was executing his part of the plan down at the Holiday Inn parking lot. He meticulously applied acid to the Mercedes, targeting the trunk, fenders, deck, convertible top, leather seats, floor mats, and even the dash. To further ensure damage, he introduced mothballs into the gas tank, knowing the havoc it would wreak on the engine if ignited. Any remaining acid was meticulously spread across the tires. Before departing, he discreetly tampered with the valve stems on Jody's car, a task completed in a mere 15 minutes. Despite our prolonged conversation, Jack eventually voiced his suspicion. "What the hell are you up to?" "I just wanted to ensure I had a solid alibi in case anything happened to Felix Brooks's car today," I casually remarked. "What's so special about today?" Jack inquired. "The pulled pork sandwich was on special," I replied with a smirk. With a swift motion, I pulled out my cell phone and dialed the daycare center. "Hi, Jessica. It's Bob Bryant. I'll be stuck at work this afternoon. Could you call Jody and ask her to pick up the boys? Thanks a bunch. You can reach her at 874-4329, extension 125. Make sure to catch her as soon as you can." "Okay, thanks again." Jack reclined in his chair, chuckling to himself as he savored the taste of the pork sandwiches. The room fell into a brief silence before Jack spoke up again. "Do you think I should call Mr. Brooks and inquire about his car?" "Why on earth would you want to do that?" I questioned. "Do you happen to have his contact information handy?" Jack pressed. I provided him with both Brooks's cell number and the number of the Holiday Inn room 125. "Take your pick." Jack activated the speakerphone and dialed the hotel number. After a few rings, Felix Brooks picked up, sounding out of breath. "Hello, who is this?" "Mr. Brooks, this is Detective Clark. I wanted to inform you that we're still investigating the vandalism to your car," Jack stated calmly. Brooks sounded startled. "Why are you calling here? How did you get this number?" "I'm a policeman, Mr. Brooks. Have you acquired a new car yet?" Jack inquired. "Yes, I have." "Why do you ask?" Brooks replied, sounding wary. "Just making sure we don't encounter a repeat of the last incident. Is the car with you now?" Jack queried. "Yes, it's parked out in the lot," Brooks confirmed. "Is everything all right?" I inquired. "Let me check," Jack responded. We listened as Felix muttered in the background, presumably peering out the window at the parking lot. There were a few indistinct noises followed by a low groan. He returned to the phone. "Something seems off. I'll have to get dressed and go check. I'll call you back." "Fair enough, but Mr. Brooks, why aren't you dressed already?" I probed. "None of your damn business. I have to go," he snapped before hanging up abruptly. Jack glanced at me with a satisfied grin. "Happy?" "Absolutely. Anyway, I have to get back to work. If you need anything, give me a call, all right? Maybe we can do lunch again next week." "I hope not. This needs to end soon before someone gets hurt," Jack remarked gravely. I returned to my tasks. Chad had ensured the logs were in perfect order, and Daniel had discreetly disposed of the acid bottles where they wouldn't be discovered. The evening at home promised to be eventful. Jody had picked up the boys but retired to bed early without a word. The following day, Jack paid me a visit. He detailed the extent of the car damage, explaining that Felix's insurance claim was pending due to the previous Lexus incident. The vehicle was deemed totaled, leaving Felix out of pocket by over $60,000. Despite Jack's assurance of my innocence, Felix remained convinced of my involvement. While Jack may have suspected my role, he couldn't prove anything, and perhaps, deep down, he didn't want to. As for Jody's tires, I never inquired, and no one volunteered any information. Since Jody had remained silent about the whole ordeal, I resolved it was time to put an end to it. My STD test results came back negative, reassuring me. I had already completed the paperwork for the lawyer to initiate the divorce proceedings. I intended to take the boys out to the Russells' ranch over the weekend, just in case Karen happened to be there. If not, we'd spend the day with Batty. The only unresolved issue was the lack of concrete evidence regarding the extramarital affair. The weekend turned out well. Karen was present, much to the delight of the kids, and we all enjoyed ourselves immensely. It felt like we were a family again, a feeling I sorely missed, as did the boys. Karen remained oblivious to the turmoil brewing, though thankfully she didn't pry. Before bidding farewell, Batty gave me a reassuring wink and assured me that everything would work out. I received an enticing job offer about 100 miles away. It offered more pay, a superior position, and the possibility of buying into the business in the future. It seemed like the perfect opportunity, except for the fact that it would take us away from Karen. The following Wednesday, Jody went through her dress-up routine once more. I wasn't sure what kind of car her boyfriend was using, but it was evident she was preparing for another rendezvous with him. I assumed they were still frequenting the same place. I knew I had to take action, but I hadn't devised a plan yet. As the guys and I pondered our next move, Batty Russell unexpectedly pulled up. She gestured for me to join her in the car and drove us silently to the plant. Parking in the rear, we entered through a private entrance directly into Mr. Russell's office. Batty facilitated introductions, and his secretary promptly served us coffee. We engaged in light conversation for a while until I couldn't contain my curiosity any longer. "Was there a specific reason you brought me here?" I finally asked. Mr. Russell chuckled. "It's time to wrap up this charade. Batty has briefed me on the situation, and we've conducted a little in-house investigation. Once everything's set, we'll proceed. You should have all the necessary information by day's end. If I do anything that embarrasses you, Bob, I apologize in advance. It's not my intention to cause you any harm." We continued chatting to pass the time, and Batty noticed my grin when the topic shifted to Karen. Despite my attempts to remain discreet, I evidently failed. The ringing phone captured everyone's attention. Mr. Russell's demeanor shifted as he took the call. "What's happening?" "All right, thanks for the update. You know what to do next, correct?" Mr. Russell's smile returned. "Everything's set. We can proceed. Felix and your wife are in their usual room at the Holiday Inn. Felix drove a company BMW, which is a violation of company policy, so it's being returned to the plant. Unfortunately, it seems your wife also has a couple of flat tires. Seems to be becoming a bit of a tradition." He activated the speakerphone and dialed the room. "Felix, this is Mr. Russell. Apologies for the interruption, but we need to discuss a crucial matter," Mr. Russell began. Felix's response was hesitant, marked by stuttering. "Yes, okay, no problem. How did you get this number?" "That's irrelevant, Felix. What's pertinent is that the legal department has been alerted to a potential sexual harassment situation. I need accurate answers from you. Is there a female company employee with you in the room?" Mr. Russell inquired. There was a momentary silence, followed by indistinct background chatter. "Yes, sir, there is," Felix replied. "Felix, is she there willingly, or are there any elements of coercion or threat involved?" Mr. Russell pressed. "No, sir, absolutely not. There's been no coercion whatsoever. She's here of her own volition. I didn't compel her to do anything," Felix clarified. "Excellent, Felix. Your honesty on this sensitive matter is appreciated. We'll draft a statement to confirm that. Now I need to speak to the young lady to verify. Could you put her on, please?" Mr. Russell requested. More murmurs filled the background before Jody came on the line. "Sir, how can I assist you?" she asked. "Jody, did Mr. Brooks coerce or threaten you in any manner to accompany him?" Mr. Russell inquired. "No, sir. He didn't threaten me at all," Jody responded. "Good to know. So it was consensual, and you weren't subjected to any intimidation. Is that correct?" Mr. Russell sought confirmation. Another brief pause ensued, followed by hushed discussions. Eventually, Jody returned to the line. "Yes, sir, it was consensual." "Excellent. When you and Felix return to the plant, we'll have the statements ready for you to sign. Can you put Felix back on, please?" Mr. Russell requested. "Sir, how did you know my name?" Jody questioned. "Don't concern yourself with that, Jody. It's inconsequential," Mr. Russell assured her. Once Felix rejoined the call, Mr. Russell instructed him to head back to the plant to sign the necessary papers in the legal department. After hanging up, Mr. Russell flashed a smile. "Batty, why don't you take Bob out for lunch and return in a couple of hours? By then, the legal team should be finished, and we can all resume our normal lives, Mr. Russell suggested. We enjoyed a delightful lunch, during which I struggled to contain my gratitude. Batty insisted that we refrain from discussing the matter further or mentioning what had transpired ever again. Additionally, she made me promise not to divulge anything to Karen. It was a promising sign. I shared my excitement about the new job offer with Batty, who expressed her happiness for both the boys and me. After lunch, we made our way back to the plant, where I obtained notarized copies of Felix and Jody's statements. Both affirmed that their affair was consensual. The legal team assured me that this evidence would be sufficient for my lawyer to proceed with the divorce. Felix and Jody were promptly terminated, their personal belongings already packed, and they were escorted off the premises. Unfortunately, neither of them had transportation available. Batty kindly lent me her car, assuring me I could return it the following day. With the papers in hand, I made a trip to the lawyer's office. Batty made multiple copies of each document. One set was designated to be sent to Felix's wife. At the bank, I closed our accounts and settled all outstanding credit card balances, promptly canceling them. Next, I contacted the gas, water, electric, and phone companies to arrange for utility disconnection by Friday afternoon. A visit to Jack Clark ensued, where I cheekily informed him of my virtuous behavior, eliciting laughter from him. I informed the landlord of my impending departure and bid farewell to my colleagues at work, receiving well wishes tinged with regret. Daniel accompanied me to the Russell Ranch with my truck, facilitating the return of Batty's car. As I prepared to pick up the boys and head home, a sense of apprehension crept over me. Upon arrival, Jody's absence from the driveway caught my attention. Inside, she sat on the couch, tears streaming down her face, a stark departure from her usual stoicism. 2 boxes of her personal belongings from work lay nearby. After tending to the boys, I stood by her side, silently offering her the chance to speak. "You just had to do it, didn't you? You had to ruin everything in my life," she choked out between sobs. "Why couldn't you just mind your own business? You had no right to interfere in mine." I was astounded by her self-centered perspective, still viewing the situation as if it solely revolved around her. She showed no regard for our children or me, let alone Felix's wife, Amelia. Our family, our life, and our plans held no significance to her. Her sole focus remained on her own actions, indifferent to everything else. Yet strangely, I felt a sense of relief knowing that I wouldn't be tethered to her for the rest of my life. Without a word, I retreated to the shower. Later, as I prepared the boys for bed, she retreated to the bedroom, shutting the door behind her. The following day, I brought the boys to work with me, ensuring that everything was in order and that Chad and Daniel could manage the system I'd implemented. We gathered boxes from various stores in preparation for the move. Passing by the Holiday Inn, I noted Jody's absence, assuming her car had been repaired by now. Repairing the flat tires must have severely depleted her shopping budget for the past month. Upon our return home, Jody was nowhere to be found. We only packed clothes and toys, leaving the rest for Jody to handle. Little did she know, by the next day, all the utilities would be shut off. Filled with anger, I took the boys out, leaving Jody watching silently as we drove away. We spent the night at a motel, seeking refuge from the turmoil. The next morning, I dropped the boys off at daycare, leaving Jessica some cookies and party favors as a token of appreciation. It was the boys' last day, and I wanted them to enjoy it with their friends. Before leaving, Jessica pulled me aside. "What happened with your wife last week?" I didn't want to pry, but now that you're leaving, I'm dying to know, Jessica inquired. She was really upset when I called. She demanded to know where I got that number, and when I mentioned you gave it to me, she started swearing up a storm. She didn't say much when she picked up the boys, but I could tell she was fuming. "I'm sorry, Jessica. I kind of set you up," I admitted. Jody was having an affair. She was at the Holiday Inn with her boyfriend, and I thought if I got you to call and interrupt their party, she might reconsider the whole thing. But it didn't work out like I hoped. Instead, she ended up getting mad at both of us. I'm serving her with divorce papers this afternoon, and the boys and I are leaving for a new job right after I pick them up. It was a low move on my part, and I apologize for dragging you into it. I visited my divorce lawyer, finding everything neatly prepared. Custody of the kids was granted to me, with Jody granted visitation rights at her discretion. Frankly, I didn't anticipate her taking much interest in them anyway. As for the rest, our assets were divided evenly, although there wasn't much to divide. There was no spousal support, child maintenance, or financial settlements of any sort. I relinquished all the furniture, appliances, and household items to her. I had no desire for them. She kept her car, which I gladly relinquished, as it had become notorious for its recurrent flat tires. Handing over the papers to Jody seemed like the final formality. Unless she contested it, the divorce would be finalized within 3 months. Attached to the divorce paperwork was a notarized statement from Felix and Jody, with a marginal note from the lawyer indicating that these statements would remain confidential if all terms of the divorce were accepted. No further inquiries were made. As I pulled up to the driveway, seeing her car there assured me she was home. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, grappling with a surge of conflicting emotions. I had loved Jody deeply. She was the only woman I had ever been truly close to. I had always assumed our relationship was normal, failing to recognize any dissatisfaction on her part. Her actions were deceptive, yet I couldn't help but feel partially responsible for my lack of attentiveness. Knocking on the door of my own home felt surreal. When she opened it, she looked weary, and her offer of a drink seemed to emphasize the distance between us. I handed her the papers, but she didn't immediately open them. Instead, she held them in her hands, her gaze shifting from the documents to me and back again. "Why?" I asked, unable to discern whether her expression conveyed anger or sadness. After a brief pause, she finally opened up, her tone tinged with a mix of resentment and regret. "He smelled like aftershave, you smelled like fertilizer. He wore our many suits while you wore jeans. He dined on lobster and steaks, while you preferred ribs and burgers. He owned a London fog overcoat, while you had your Carhartt. He drove a fancy car, while you drove a truck. His nails were always manicured, while yours were perpetually dirty. He had a prestigious career, while you remained a farm boy. Need I continue?" she retorted. "I yearned for a life that you couldn't provide, Bob. I'm sorry we got married. I did so for all the wrong reasons. I saw you as an escape from my parents, failing to look beyond the immediate. I was foolish to believe you could fulfill my desires. I love my children, but I regret having them. It sounds awful, I know, but I lack maternal instinct. I hoped finding someone who could fulfill my dreams would bring contentment, but it only deepened my dissatisfaction. I misled you. I failed as a mother, but I'm not sorry for pursuing my aspirations and seeking something better." "What about his wife? What about your husband? What about your children? What about your family?" I interjected. Her demeanor shifted abruptly. My questions seemed to provoke anger, and any semblance of remorse vanished from her expression. "I couldn't care less about any of that. It's my turn now. I want to live the life I've always dreamed of. A husband from the farm and 2 messy kids don't fit into that picture. I've got your damn papers, so just leave and let me get on with my life," she spat out bitterly. Her words made my decision simple. I turned and walked out without another word. When I picked up the boys, Jessica offered to make more phone calls if needed. Later, I called the utility companies and asked them to delay disconnection until the end of the month. Despite everything, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of sympathy for her. 3 months later, the divorce was finalized without a hitch. I never heard a peep from Jody. According to the lawyer, everything proceeded smoothly as planned. While my new job was fulfilling, I missed out on the opportunity to buy the business. Someone else snatched it up, along with a prime quarter section of land. My boss mentioned they intended to turn it into a horse breeding farm. While my job remained secure, my aspirations of owning my own place took a setback. 2 weeks later, construction commenced next to the feed store. We speculated on what was being built, and eventually, one of the guys approached the site engineer for answers. To our surprise, it was revealed to be a veterinary clinic specializing in large animals. It piqued my interest momentarily, but I brushed it off as wishful thinking. Remarkably, the entire building was erected in less than 60 days. The new owner was scheduled to make an appearance on Saturday, prompting the boys and me to swing by during our lunch outing, filled with a sense of curiosity. Suddenly, both boys began excitedly yelling, "Karen, Karen." There she was, looking radiant as ever, accompanied by Betty. Karen had pursued her veterinary degree and now aimed to raise show horses while managing the large animal clinic. As she showed the boys around the new facility, Betty and I caught up. We all went out for lunch together, where Karen shared her plans to build a new home on the property to be closer to her work. The ride home that evening was filled with joyous grins from ear to ear. 5 years later, Karen's passion for raising beautiful horses had blossomed into a thriving business. Her clinic was renowned for its success. Meanwhile, I had expanded my ventures, now boasting 6 feed stores. The boys had gained 2 baby sisters, whom they adored dearly. Every weekend, my mother-in-law Betty and Mr. Russell, whose first name I never did learn, visited us without fail. However, Jody never made an effort to visit the boys. The second story. Here we sit once more, stationed in the waiting area outside the office of the marriage therapist hand-picked by my wife. Our weekly rendezvous with her marks the 12th occasion, though unbeknownst to the therapist, it also signifies our final encounter. I've orchestrated a surprise for both my wife and our counselor, envisioning a future where they convene without my presence to dissect where things veered off course. My wife can foot the bill this time. Tales of therapists like the one we're about to see circulate, yet I never fathomed enduring such an ordeal. I've dubbed her the Quack. She exudes a palpable disdain for men, and it's as straightforward as that. Her mission appears to center around validating women and their questionable conduct. Despite my objections, my wife insisted on her choice. No surprises there. We could have jointly selected a reputable therapist, conducted interviews, and fostered mutual trust in our decision, embarking on the arduous journey together. But alas, that wasn't the case. Jenny evidently sought to tilt the scales in her favor, controlling the narrative of our sessions. It's not that I harbor aversion to therapy, rather, I'm skeptical of the version we've been subjected to. Every grievance voiced by my wife inevitably circles back to me, accompanied by the refrain, "James, what you fail to grasp is your failure to fulfill your duties as a husband." Well, today marks the end of that cycle. Perhaps a bit of reflection on the journey leading to this juncture is in order. We tied the knot straight out of college a quarter-century ago. Our offspring, a son and a daughter, now college-bound themselves, are exemplary individuals, though don't ask me how they turned out that way. I endeavor to be the finest father possible, yet my wife's frequent absence led our children to affectionately dub me Dom, short for Daddy Mom, as I assumed both parental roles. Initially, I bristled at the moniker, but soon realized it symbolized my dual responsibilities. From packing their lunches to aiding with homework, shuttling them to sports events, meeting with teachers, and even handling household chores and meal prep, I wore multiple hats while my wife's presence waned. Her job, she insisted, was crucial, though it paid little, leaving her fatigued and disengaged upon returning home. Over time, her focus shifted outward, her discontent manifesting in complaints directed at me. I perpetually fell short, insufficient effort, erroneous execution, inadequate finances, subpar vacations, the litany of grievances knew no end. However, amidst this discontent, my children's gratitude served as a beacon of affirmation. Hearing their heartfelt declarations, "Dad, you're the best," validated the sacrifices and efforts invested, offering solace amid the storm of marital discord. You're probably familiar with the tale of the frog in boiling water. Well, that frog was me, and I had reached my boiling point, ready to leap out of the pot. Much of my adult life has been spent grappling with the complexities of my wife's upbringing. Raised in a household straight out of a psychological thriller, her childhood was marred by dysfunction of the darkest kind. Her mother's serial infidelity, veiled under the guise of innocent shopping trips, instilled in her a code of silence that masked the turmoil within their home. Meanwhile, her father, though not lacking in intelligence, was shackled by his own timidity, a mouse that roared only after drowning his inhibitions in alcohol. Their residence became a battlefield devoid of communication, camaraderie, or joy. For my wife, evenings meant retreating to her room, seeking refuge from the chaos that engulfed the rest of the house. It's hardly surprising that she emerged from such an environment bearing scars of deception and manipulation, traits that would shape her adulthood. It took me decades to grasp the extent of her brokenness, to realize that she was fundamentally incompatible with the concept of marriage. Yet, even as this understanding gnawed at me, my love for our children anchored me to the sinking ship of our relationship until they reached maturity. I, too, sought solace in therapy, detailing the recurring patterns and recounting my wife's tumultuous upbringing. However, my therapist gently redirected my focus inward, emphasizing that the only person I could change was myself. Through her guidance, I learned to prioritize self-care, to assert my own worth, and to resist being dragged into the abyss of my wife's desolation. My children became my raison d'etre, their well-being my primary concern, as I held on to hope that one day my wife might choose to reclaim her place within our family. As our children embarked on their college journeys, I sensed the impending finale drawing near. The unsustainable status quo weighed heavily on me, and I harbored little doubt that Jenny would soon detonate the remnants of our marriage. My therapist had shed light on a crucial insight. When raised amidst chaos, individuals acclimate to it. It sounded bizarre at first, but her explanation resonated deeply. Jenny's tendency to sabotage moments of tranquility stemmed from her subconscious affinity for chaos, a revelation that affirmed my sanity. Despite recognizing the pattern, I had struggled to accept it. Now, with our children pursuing higher education, our financial stability secured, the mortgage nearing its end, and ample leisure time beckoning, Jenny seemed destined to dismantle it all. My ruminations were abruptly interrupted by the creak of the office door, heralding the arrival of another couple into the waiting room. The husband wore a crestfallen expression, while his wife exuded an air of smug satisfaction. In that moment, I couldn't help but acknowledge the quack's adeptness at earning her fee. The routine played out as expected. We'd wait for the quack to conclude her notes from the previous session before the inevitable summons. "Jenny, I'm ready to see you and James now," her words serving as a thinly veiled invitation to the next sacrificial lamb. Seated on the couch, Jenny anticipated my customary position beside her, yet this time I opted for the chair to her right, my back turned to the door. "James, please sit with your wife," the quack interjected, visibly irked. Apologizing, I explained, I prefer this vantage point. Besides, my back has been bothering me, and that sofa has never been accommodating. It was an understatement, to say the least. The quack's annoyance palpable, she prodded. "James, is there anything you wish to address following our last session?" "Yes, I have something to say. Despite our consistent efforts in therapy, I still can't shake the feeling that my wife is being unfaithful. It's a lingering doubt that persists, regardless of what's discussed here," I confessed, my voice heavy with unresolved suspicion. Without missing a beat, the quack interjected, preempting my wife's response. "James, as I've assured you before, I am certain that Jenny is not cheating on you. We've had discussions, and I firmly believe this is a product of your own imagination. It's time to let go of these unfounded suspicions and move forward." Before I could retort, she redirected her attention to my wife. "Jenny, what would you like to address today?" Her bias was glaringly apparent, wasn't it? Jenny wasted no time in pinpointing my alleged deficiency. "He doesn't support me." And just like that, she launched into her litany of grievances, citing instances of my supposed lack of support, complaints about her late work hours, or desire to socialize with friends. It was a familiar script, with Jenny airing her grievances and the quack nodding along in agreement, as if on cue. As Jenny continued her tirade, I allowed my thoughts to wander. I recalled a previous one-on-one session with the quack, where I tentatively broached my suspicions of infidelity, only to be swiftly dismissed and labeled as paranoid. Yet mere months later, my doubts solidified into certainty, rendering the quack's assurances obsolete as I geared up for confrontation. It took time to prepare, but... James, are you listening?" My reverie was abruptly shattered. "Huh. Oh, yeah, I heard. I don't support her," I replied, my tone resigned and laden with unresolved tension. Jenny mentioned that you're neglecting her and her needs, the quack relayed, her tone tinged with exasperation. You're unsupportive when she works late, and you exhibit jealousy when she seeks time with her friends. I couldn't shake the gnawing suspicion, but I keep circling back to this gut feeling that she's not faithful to our marriage. The quack's patience wore thin, her contempt barely concealed. James, it's time to face reality and act like a man. I've already assured you she's not cheating on you. Your wife deserves a partner who can step up and fulfill his duties. If you persist with this behavior, perhaps she should seek someone who will. Her disdain was palpable as she shook her head in dismay. Turning to my wife, she prompted, "Jenny, you were saying." "He's neglecting household chores, like cutting the lawn and painting the house." Jenny launched in her litany of complaints, her grievances echoing in the room. As she prattled on, I couldn't help but think, I can predict this tune after just a few notes. It seemed I had let my thoughts slip, a careless lapse on my part. "James, what's amusing you? This is serious." The quack snapped me back to attention. "Sorry," I muttered, offering the most insincere of apologies, my mind drifting once more as Jenny continued her tirade. Jenny always insisted on driving separately to her sessions with the quack. I could easily pick her up, but that would never suffice. And after each meeting, she mysteriously became unavailable in the afternoons. It took time, but I eventually caught on. Hiring a private investigator, I uncovered the truth. She rendezvoused with Henry Walker at the Best Western every Thursday afternoon. It wasn't sporadic, it was a long-standing affair. Yet even in her infidelity, she maintained distance, revealing a deeper brokenness within her. They had a standing reservation, making it a breeze for my private investigator to install a camera and recorder in their usual meeting room. Once I had that evidence, therapy sessions became a waiting game while I meticulously prepared my strategy. Now, I had 3 adversaries in my sights, my wife, Henry, and the quack. When the time was ripe, I paid a visit to Henry's wife and provided her with copies of the incriminating evidence. Despite her health issues, my lawyer assured me that she could legally leverage Henry's infidelity to her advantage in the divorce settlement. It seemed like the perfect retribution I had been seeking. James, are you listening?" The quack's voice pierced through my thoughts. "Huh?" "Oh, yeah," I heard. "The house needs a new coat of paint," I replied absent-mindedly. "Well," she prompted, but before I could respond, there was a sudden knock on the door. "Who the hell is that?" The quack rose from her seat in annoyance. "I'll get it." "It's for me anyway," I interjected, swiftly moving to answer the door. "This is a session, James, sacred time. What do you mean arranging something outside?" The quack's protest trailed off as I swung the door open. Standing before me were Henry and his wife Eva, the latter appearing determined despite her frailty. "Welcome. Just in time. I'm glad you could make it. Come on in," I greeted them warmly. Henry seemed bewildered, while Eva exuded a sense of purpose, her hand trembling as she leaned on her cane. With resolute steps, she entered the room. Henry, evidently unaware of my identity, extended his hand and confessed, "My wife made this appointment. I honestly don't know exactly why we're here." "Allow me to explain, Henry," I began, gesturing towards my wife seated on the sofa. "You know my wife, Jenny, don't you?" As the realization dawned on him, I witnessed the color drain from Henry's face, leaving him pale and shaken. I don't," Henry stammered, clearly flustered. "No need to fib, Henry. We're all friends here. Therapy sessions are a safe place," I quipped, borrowing a line from my first session with the quack. Coincidentally, she chose that moment to interject. "James, what is going on here? How can you interrupt a session like this?" The quack's voice brimmed with indignation. "Sorry, Miss Collins, this is Henry Walker," I clarified, my tone steely. "He and my wife have been involved in an affair for almost a year now. And before you dismiss it as imagination, I have ample evidence, photographs and videos of their rendezvous at the Best Western." Turning to Henry, I continued, "Henry, why don't you take a seat next to Jenny? If you can engage in intimate acts with her, you can at least sit beside her as we address this issue. Then, turning to Eva, I offered, "Eva, it's always a pleasure to see you. Would you like this chair? It's surprisingly comfortable." With a grateful smile, Eva settled into the chair, her gaze piercing Henry with silent accusation. Taking the seat opposite her, I positioned myself so the coffee table lay between us, Jenny and Henry on my right, and the quack on my left, her expression akin to a startled fish. "So, isn't this cozy?" I remarked casually. "Eva, you're looking radiant as always. How are you feeling today?" "Better than most days, James. Thank you for asking. I believe a weight is about to be lifted off my shoulders," Eva replied, her optimism palpable. I couldn't help but smile at her resilience. Eva was facing real challenges, yet her spirit remained unbroken. "So, Ms. Collins was telling me earlier that my suspicions of Jenny's infidelity are all in my head," I continued, directing the conversation. Eva chuckled at that remark, her laughter echoing in the room. Glancing around, I addressed the group. "Who's interested in seeing the evidence? I brought my tablet if anyone wants to view the footage." Then, fixing my gaze on the quack, I added, "How about you? Care to witness that despicable act of adultery you claimed didn't exist?" "No. You seem rather silent all of a sudden." Addressing Henry, I expressed, "Henry, you may have crossed a line by being involved with my wife, but despite her deceit, I've been her husband for a significant period, and I still feel accountable for her welfare. However, your approach to intimacy with her is concerning. It's not about making love. It seems more transactional, like that of a prostitute or a cat. Perhaps that's what she desires at this moment, Jenny." I turned to Jenny, adding, "Had I known your preference for such treatment, maybe you wouldn't have sought solace in the arms of such a despicable coward." Her unexpected tears caught me off guard. I couldn't fathom the reason behind them. Our marriage had unraveled. Henry's marriage had unraveled. She had the freedom to pursue any man she desired. So why the sudden outpouring of emotion? All she stood to lose was me, and she had never shown any real desire for me, except perhaps for the stability I provided, an emotional anchor she couldn't furnish herself. Finally, Jenny found her voice amidst her tears. "I never intended for you to find out. I'm sorry, James. I never meant to cause you pain," she lamented, reciting the tired cliches of a remorseful cheater. It bordered on pathetic, almost laughable. "Save the theatrics, Jenny. You've had a year to reflect on your actions," I retorted, unimpressed. Turning to the sorry excuse for a man beside her, I continued, "And what about you? Your wife has sacrificed for you, raising your children, even with her special needs. And this is how you repay her? Sneaking around behind her back. Have you ever considered facing your responsibilities like a man and being honest for once in your life?" I could sense the anger simmering beneath his surface, but I was more than ready to face it if given the chance. But that opportunity never came. In the end, they both sat there, offering feeble excuses and hollow apologies, until another knock on the door broke the tense silence. "Oops," I glanced at Eva. "Looks like our final guest has arrived." Up until this point, the quack had remained surprisingly quiet. Her silence prompted a second outburst, to which I simply shrugged before opening the door. A middle-aged man in a cheap suit stepped into the office, and I gestured toward the sofa. "That's them." Approaching the two cheaters, he handed each a manila envelope and solemnly declared, "Jenny Harris, Henry Walker, you have been served." With a snap of his camera, he concluded his task and departed without another word. It seems serving legal papers in a marriage therapist's office was a novelty for him, evident from the wicked grin he flashed me as he exited. Closing the door behind him, I returned to my seat. "Well, this has certainly been eventful, hasn't it? It seems our time is nearly up," I remarked, glancing at the clock on the wall. "Perhaps Ms. Collins can spend the remaining minutes helping the cheaters process today's events." Turning to the quack, I added with a touch of sarcasm, "And maybe you can contemplate how you managed to get it all so wrong." Rising from my seat, I assisted Eva to her feet and linked her arm with mine as we exited the office. As we strolled down the hall, I inquired, "Are you going to be okay?" "I think so. When you first showed me the evidence of their betrayal, I was devastated. I questioned how the man I married could betray me like that. But now I realize he isn't the man I thought he was, or perhaps never was. All I'm losing is a memory or an illusion of what I thought I had and didn't, Eva reflected. Her words struck a chord, resonating with the realization that she spoke not only for herself, but for both of us. She looked at me with a mix of sadness and resilience. I still have my children, and soon my grandchildren will come along. I'll be okay. You also have friends. Don't forget that. And who knows? Maybe in time you might count me among them, I offered. A sad smile graced her lips as she gently patted my arm. I already do. In that case, how about having lunch with a friend? I suggested. Her expression brightened, a genuine smile breaking through. I'd love that. Driving our own cars to the restaurant, our lunch began with a somber air as we silently revisited the events of the day. We had anticipated this moment, planned for it together, yet it still marked the end of 2 marriages and the lives we had once envisioned. We shared memories and thoughts about the couple we had confronted earlier, gradually shifting the conversation towards moving forward. Discussions about our children and local happenings infused the atmosphere with a glimmer of hope. Discovering mutual friends, we found solace in the knowledge that support surrounded us. You know, once this is all behind us, our friends will probably try setting us up on blind dates with their single acquaintances, I remarked, shuddering at the notion. She chuckled softly. It might not be as dreadful as you think. Who knows? You might even enjoy it. I shook my head with a sigh, unable to entertain the idea. Yet, as our conversation continued, optimism began to bloom, casting a hopeful light on both our futures. Upon arriving home, I found myself unconcerned with the whereabouts or actions of the cheaters, whether they departed together to strategize their defense, sought legal counsel, or simply headed for their usual clandestine meeting spot. Perhaps Jenny had given Henry a ride, as Eva likely had their car. But as expected, it wasn't that straightforward. Jenny returned home later, armed with a barrage of apologies interspersed with blame shifting, an age-old tactic where a woman's infidelity is somehow partially attributed to her husband's supposed shortcomings. I couldn't help but wonder if the quack was still guiding her. As Jenny's apologies dwindled into tears, I knew it was time for my own statement. Keeping it concise and direct, I addressed her solemnly. Jenny, throughout our marriage, I've harbored sympathy for you. Your upbringing was fraught with turmoil, and I believed that with a loving marriage, you could heal and evolve into the woman you aspired to be. However, what I failed to realize is that you're not capable of healing. You're fundamentally broken. Despite our progress, whenever life took a positive turn, you would sabotage it. Happiness eludes you. You're familiar only with sorrow and ruin. I can no longer endure that existence, nor can I tolerate living with a deceitful and unfaithful partner. Our journey together ends here, Jenny. Our children have grown, and it's time for us to forge our separate paths. After letting my words sink in for a moment, I concluded, Jenny, you truly need help. Not from that quack who merely validates your actions and excuses your behavior. Seek out genuine therapy, and when you do, allow the therapist to take the lead. I know you have a tendency to control everything, but true progress can only be made if you relinquish that control. Find a skilled professional who can guide you through a journey of self-exploration, helping you confront the ghosts and demons of your past. Promise me that you'll seek real help. I doubted she fully grasped the gravity of my words. Her mind was clouded with too many barriers preventing her from accepting guidance. Sadly, she lacked the courage to confront her inner demons. I'll admit, I wrestled with the decision to divorce Jenny. I kept returning to my vows, recalling the commitment of in sickness and in health. There was no denying that Jenny was unwell. However, I ultimately realized that regardless of her condition, she understood the distinction between right and wrong. Betrayal is betrayal, sick or not. It's been 3 years since that pivotal therapy session, and I've since moved on. The divorce was finalized just over 2 years ago, with our lives divided down the middle, and a 3-year support order was put in place, which now has less than a year remaining. Through this ordeal, I've come to understand that when love dissipates and anger subsides, what lingers is a profound sense of sadness and loss. I mourned not only for what was lost, but also for what could have been, though truth be told, that sense of loss had long preceded the divorce, if it ever truly existed at all. But life doesn't permit dwelling on losses. I relocated across town, leaned on my friends who provided invaluable support, and reconstructed my life with a renewed focus on the passions and interests I had too often set aside to accommodate my ex-wife's desires. Along this journey, I encountered a remarkable woman who shares my interests. Both of us carry scars from past hurts, so we're proceeding cautiously. Optimism colors my outlook, but I'm in no rush. As for Henry, he received a reprieve. Revenge wasn't worth risking imprisonment. More importantly, Eva relied on his financial support, so he got what was owed. This whole experience has imparted a crucial lesson. We possess the capacity to rebuild a fulfilling life by remaining true to ourselves, looking ahead, and seizing the opportunities life presents. As for my ex-wife, I doubt she'll ever find true happiness. It's not in her nature to embrace life's joys and live fully. She'll forever chase elusive desires, sacrificing what truly matters along the way, while failing to invest in the lives around her. It's saddening, but I've come to accept that I cannot change her. All I can do is forge ahead. The third story. As James Turner sat in LaGuardia Airport in New York, he couldn't help but feel that it wasn't the most pleasant way to spend an evening. He watched the boarding process for what he hoped would be his flight back home to Charlotte. James, along with his two sisters, owned a small pharmaceutical company that their father had created decades earlier. The father had developed a series of valuable but rarely used drugs, making the company profitable but offering little growth opportunity. With both parents passed, James had spent the last few days in New York negotiating the sale of the company to a big pharmaceutical concern. Today, James had reached a deal with his lawyers and brokers, leaving them to finalize the contract negotiation. James hoped he would get home tonight, but it looked doubtful. The last flight of the day to Charlotte was fully booked, and he was third on the wait list. He hadn't called his wife Polly because he wasn't sure what to tell her. Sitting at a bar where he could watch the gate, he drank his second gin and tonic, thinking about the deal and the money he and his sisters would share. Over $10 million for him, plus a well-compensated transition period with the big pharma company, meant a new lifestyle for him and Kyle. Their twin girls were already out of the nest, or at least on their way. Both were attending college, juniors at Duke, where the tuition was eating him alive. But that would all change when the pharma deal closed. Meanwhile, the boarding process was finishing, and the gate agents were ushering the last passengers into the jetway. Then, a bit of a miracle happened. The boarding sign changed, and James saw his name appear as having cleared the wait list. He tossed money on the bar, gave the bartender a thumbs up, grabbed his briefcase and overnight bag, and sprinted to the gate. The gate agent handed him a boarding pass and quickly explained to him and two other waitlisters at a party of 4 who had checked in remotely had failed to show up, so they got the seats. James ran down the jetway with his new companions, arriving at the boarding door to find out he had gotten a first-class seat. A good sign, he thought. Cleared the flight, sitting in first class, maybe home a day early. Maybe that meant the pharma deal would really close. As the boarding door closed and he settled into his seat, the flight attendant asked if he wanted something to drink as they taxied to the runway. Feeling like he had earned it, he ordered another G&T, then drifted off to sleep, dreaming of a future for him and Polly with enough money to always fly first class. The jolt and screech of landing stirred him from his sleep. Disoriented, he stumbled his way to the taxi stand, too exhausted and a bit tipsy to consider retrieving his pickup from the airport parking lot. It was far too late to ask Polly to come get him. They lived a few miles outside of Charlotte. The taxi ride was long enough for him to doze off again, only waking when they reached home. James paid the driver generously and stumbled out of the cab, feeling sluggish. It had been a long, stressful day and half the night. All he wanted now was to snuggle into bed with Polly. As he turned toward the house, something caught his eye and snapped him fully awake. A gold-colored Mercedes was parked in the driveway, blocking his side of the garage. To James, it looked like a very fancy car, but then any Mercedes would seem fancy to him. The house was dark, well past midnight. James stood frozen for a few moments. He had talked to Polly from his lawyer's office earlier in the day, and she hadn't mentioned any overnight guests. He tried to push away the unsettling thoughts, hoping for a happy ending that involved coupling with Polly, but his mind wouldn't cooperate. Slowly, he made his way to the door in the breezeway between the garage and the house, unlocked it, and entered the silent house. Moving through the kitchen and up the stairs to their bedroom, James felt a leaden weight settle in his chest. The bedroom door was ajar, a sign that they weren't expecting him. He stepped inside and felt himself shut down. His brain stopped functioning, his breath caught in his throat, and it seemed even his heart paused. The unthinkable sight before him paralyzed him. Polly was fast asleep, sprawled on her side of the bed, her arm draped over another man, who was also asleep and wearing a slight smile. James stood there, time stretched out endlessly. Eventually, his brain started working again. He looked at Polly, seeing her holding the other man, both of them snoring softly. It shattered him. He had always loved Polly's snoring, finding it comforting, almost like a soft purr. He used to drift off to sleep, feeling safe in her presence, but now that sound would haunt him. He realized he would never hear it again, never fall asleep beside her. Despite the pain in his heart, James began to think more clearly. He noticed the man's neatly folded clothes on a chair where he had often sat himself. A smoldering fury ignited within James. He grabbed the pants, extracted the wallet and car keys, then paused to consider his options. He could lash out at the man, whom he now dubbed asshole, with a tennis racket from the bedroom closet. Or he could have done the same to Polly. Both actions, though satisfying momentarily, could spell trouble in the long run. Another plan started to form. He pulled out his cell phone to snap a few incriminating photos as the idea took shape. Once he finished taking pictures, James gathered Ashwell's clothes and shoes. Ashwell was a big guy, much larger than James. Standing at 5'10" and weighing about 160 pounds, James realized a tennis racket might not be a wise choice, even in the short term. With Ashwell's belongings in hand, James took one last look at his wife, his once beloved wife, the mother of his precious daughters, and steeled himself against the love that had sustained him for over 2 decades. Without shedding a tear, he left the bedroom, descended the stairs, and stepped outside. The key fob unlocked the Mercedes, and James placed his briefcase and overnight bag inside before settling into the driver's seat. He had never been a connoisseur of fancy cars, but as he sat in the Benz, he found himself appreciating it. After figuring out the controls, he shifted into gear and drove off. A mile down the road, James pulled over to inspect Ashwell's wallet. It contained the usual items, some cash, business cards identifying Ashwell as Nick Peterson, a senior sales associate at a local Mercedes dealership, and a driver's license showing an address in Charlotte. If Ashwell had a family there, James mused, he could cause some real trouble, both for Ashwell and possibly for Polly. However, James was exhausted, so he decided to head for a nearby motel and get some rest. Polly Turner, a meticulous woman, knew she wasn't as intellectually sharp as her husband James. However, her attention to detail had allowed her affair with Nick Peterson to continue for nearly 5 months without James suspecting a thing. As she lay in bed the next morning with Nick, she pondered over the situation. James was still in New York, she presumed. Too much of a car salesman, she thought, deciding it was time to end the affair. She enjoyed Nick's imposing presence, reminiscent of the football players she dated in college, but his increasing possessiveness was a concern. Allowing him to spend the night was a mistake she wouldn't repeat. She intended to spend her life with James, and though he would never know about Nick, having another man in their bed was too disrespectful. She turned to Nick, but suddenly the alarm clock interrupted her thoughts, ringing at 7 in the morning. Today, she resolved to call Nick and end things gently but firmly. Polly dressed and headed for the shower. As she returned to the bedroom, Nick emerged from the guest room with a towel wrapped around his waist. "Polly, where did you move my clothes?" he asked. "What? I didn't move them anywhere. Where did you leave them last night?" "Right there, on that chair, but they're gone." "Did you take them into the guest room with you? They must be here somewhere." Nick mumbled, walking back down the hall to check, only to return a moment later. No, they're not there. They're not here, there. His voice trailed off as he struggled to understand the disappearance of his clothes. Did you leave them downstairs when we came in last night? Polly asked impatiently, recalling their heavy drinking the evening before. No, I'm sure I didn't, but I'll go look, Nick replied, leaving the bedroom. He returned quickly, rushing up the stairs. Polly, my car is gone. My clothes aren't downstairs. Someone was here last night. They took my clothes. They stole my car. Damn, what's going on? What? How? Polly tried to make sense of Nick's words. How could his clothes and car disappear when they had been in the house all night? Could someone have broken in? Suddenly, Polly collapsed onto the bed. What's wrong? Nick asked, concerned. Polly struggled to respond, her breathing labored, making it difficult to speak. Nick, what if it was James? She finally suggested. What if he came home from New York while we were sleeping? What if he took your stuff and your car? Oh damn, Nick muttered as he collapsed onto the bed next to Polly. You need to find out where he is. If it was him, well, that's one thing. But if he's still in New York, that means some burglar broke in. And that means we need to call the cops. I have to get my stuff back and my car. Shit, that car. If we call the cops, they'll want to know who owns it, and it's titled in my wife's name. For some goddamn tax reason, His voice trailed off as he contemplated a future that might range from just bad to absolutely disastrous. I'll call his office. His secretary comes in really early, and she'll know where he is. Polly pulled out her phone and dialed James's office. Even though it wasn't quite 8 o'clock, James's secretary answered immediately. James Turner's office. May I help you? Hi, Stacy. This is Polly. I know it's really early, and I'm not sure where James is. He didn't call last night, so have you heard from him? Polly, it is early, and I know the team in New York worked really late last night. They probably are getting a late start today. I talked to James about 6 yesterday, just before I went home. He said they were making good progress, and they might have a deal today. That's good news. So he's still in New York, right? Yes, I'm pretty sure he is. I expect to hear from him once they're all back at the lawyer's office. Do you want me to ask him to call you? Yes, please, but only if he has the time. I understand how crucial this deal is. Sure thing. Bye then. They ended the call, and Polly turned to Nick. James is still in New York, so we should consider calling 911 to report a break-in and a car theft. Polly, what's the plan? Do we tell them that your lover's clothes were stolen from your bedroom and his car from your driveway? We're in deep trouble. All right, I see your point. Let's brainstorm. How about I drive you to your place, you change into some clothes, and then report the thefts as if they happened there while your wife was taking the kids to school. We can skip mentioning the stolen clothes. Explaining that would be tougher than a stolen car. Yeah, but I already told my wife I was in Atlanta yesterday for a meeting about the new Mercedes S-Class, and I won't be back until this afternoon. Okay, but the plan still holds. We just wait until maybe noon, when you would be getting back anyway. You stopped by home, left the keys in the car since it was a quick stop before you went to the dealership, and your car got hijacked while you were in your house. You know, I think that might work, and I could say I left my wallet in the car, and they took that too. And we can hang out here for a few hours, maybe end up needing another shower, maybe together. Nick, okay, yeah, I need to call into work to take a sick day. Polly worked as a paralegal at a small law firm. The work was okay, if a little boring. She stepped into the hallway to make the call, and came back into the bedroom to find Nick back in bed, no towel around him, and stroking his cock back to what she had to admit was a nice erection. She was tempted, but thinking about James and about her decision earlier to end the affair, she decided to say no. Nick, she said, making no movement to take her own clothes off, I think it is time to end this. We've had a good run, but you know it could have been James last night. We were lucky that it was actually a bad guy. Let's find some clothes for you and maybe go get some breakfast at a drive-through place. Nick looked at her, thought hard about trying to change her mind, but finally realized she was right. They had been lucky, and there was always another attractive middle-aged mom coming into the dealership. All right, I agree, it's been a good run. So, what about getting you some clothes? It turned out to be more challenging than expected. Nick was 50 pounds heavier and 4 inches taller than James. Polly eventually managed to find a pair of old, ragged sweatpants that somewhat fit Nick after she made some adjustments by cutting V-shaped sections out of the waist. She then improvised a makeshift belt using some tied-together shoelaces to hold up the sweatpants. For a top, she found a sweatshirt that had turned pink due to being washed in the wrong load. She cut off the sleeves and widened the armholes, and Nick had his outfit. Polly almost made a joke about clown attire, but seeing Nick's expression, she just smiled instead. They decided to pass the time by watching TV until it was time to head to Nick's house. James. Earlier that morning, around the time Nick was discovering his missing clothes and car, James pulled into the driveway of the address listed on Nick's driver's license. It was a nice house with a small bicycle leaning against the side of the garage. Sitting in his car for a moment, James pondered, his mind swirling with thoughts, but still no tears. The night in the motel had passed swiftly, and he had gone out for a run at daybreak. Surprisingly, he didn't feel as bad as he expected. Perhaps he was still in shock. Approaching the front door, James carried Nick's wallet with the driver's license visible. He rang the bell, and a young woman, still appearing to be in her 20s, opened the door. She was attractive in a disheveled sort of way. James, wearing his suit from the previous day in New York, a white shirt now wrinkled and no tie, didn't look his best, but he hoped he didn't come across as threatening. He raised Nick's driver's license for the woman to see and gestured towards the gold Mercedes. Before he could speak, she slammed the door shut, but then reopened it a few seconds later, holding up her cell phone. I have 911 dialed on my phone, ready to call, unless you tell me my husband is okay. Ma'am, I have a photo on my phone of your husband and my wife in bed last night, sleeping soundly. Frankly, I don't think your husband is okay, and I don't think my wife is either. If you want to call 911, go right ahead, and I'll just wait in the car. They locked eyes for a moment until her expression softened, and she opened the door to let him in. As she began to say something, they heard a voice from the kitchen, "Mommy." "Wait here, I'll be right back," she said, turning away, presumably heading back to the kitchen, James guessed. He heard voices, hers and at least one child's. She returned with a cup of coffee for him. "I hope you drink it black. I have to get my kids ready for school and then drive them. I'm afraid I trust you right now more than I trust my husband. You can stay here until I get back, and then we'll talk." "Okay." "Fine," James replied. "I'm afraid you and I are in the same boat." He settled into his seat in the living room as the woman and her 2 kids appeared. She introduced him as a friend of their father's and hurried them out the door. James sat there, sipping the mediocre coffee, contemplating calling his office but deciding against it. When the woman returned, she dashed up the stairs off the living room without a word. A few minutes later, she reappeared, looking better with her hair combed and a touch of makeup. She extended her hand to James. As they shook hands, she introduced herself. "Sorry about the chaos earlier. I'm Maggie Peterson, currently married to Nick Peterson, who is currently involved with the woman you're currently married to." James chuckled at her choice of words, finding some relief in laughter. "You're absolutely right about all the currentlys. I'm James Turner, and my wife is currently Polly Turner." He then recounted the events of the previous night, watching as Maggie's tears began to flow. "Polly and I will be getting a divorce, and I'm sure the pictures will help me get a decent settlement. I can send them to your phone if you think you might need them." "Yeah, I suppose I should have them," Maggie replied, her eyes devoid of emotion as she looked at James. He reached for his phone, hesitating when she said, "Wait, don't send them to me. If I see them, I'll never be able to forget. You keep them, and if I need them, I'll call you, right?" "Sure," James agreed, but then added, "I might not be in my current job much longer, and I definitely won't be in my current home. Let me give you my lawyer's name and number. You can always reach him if you need the pictures or any help in a divorce situation." "Okay, thanks," Maggie said. "But what do we do now? Are you returning the car?" Waiting for Nick to confront him. "You saw him. He's a big guy. even if he's gotten a bit out of shape. He was supposed to be in Atlanta yesterday for some car meeting and staying overnight there. He should be back today. You know, I kinda like the car, and I've never driven a Mercedes before. I'm thinking I'll keep it until someone makes me return it. Your husband, or as I like to call him, a troll, may have. Maggie burst out laughing, and James joined in, both in desperate need of any comic relief they could find. Actually, the car is in my name, Maggie said. For some tax reason, more depreciation I think, Nick, or should I say Asrol, put it in my name since I drive more than he does. And she paused in thought, then continued, you know, since I own the car, I can write a permission slip for you to drive it, and the cops can call me to confirm if you get pulled over. James liked that idea, but didn't respond, as Maggie was obviously still formulating a plan. Also, she began, there have been numerous break-ins in our neighborhood recently. You have Nick's keys and clothes. If the spare key we keep in the backyard is missing when he arrives, he might attempt to break in. And if our security system is set to instant alert, he could end up drawing some unwanted attention from the police. Maggie, I think I'm falling in love with you all over again. You're amazing. All right, let's not get carried away. Nick might just wait to return until the kids and I are back from school this afternoon. But I can pick them up and take them to the park for a while, giving him more time to get into even more trouble than he'll be in when I catch him. Whatever happens, please keep me informed, especially if he does get into trouble with the police, and call me when you need the car back. I don't want you getting into any trouble. Will do. Now you need to get out of here, and so do I. James departed in the sleek gold Mercedes, pondering how much one in a better color would cost. Maggie had given him the permission slip, so he assumed she would retrieve the hidden key, set the alarm, and leave for the rest of the day. Polly and Nick. Around noon, Polly dropped Nick off at his house and quickly sped away, as if she wanted to avoid any further interaction. Nick approached his front door with a mixture of hope and dread. He hoped it might be unlocked because Maggie was home, but dreaded the possibility of her being there. Naturally, it was locked, and he hurried around to the backyard, where they usually kept a spare key hidden under a rock. But to his dismay, the rock was missing. Damn, he muttered, surveying the back of the house, contemplating whether to break in. He attempted the back door, but it was also locked. Realizing he had no other option, he resigned himself to breaking in. He examined the windows along the back, weighing his options. The window into the family room seemed the most viable, being the largest. Breaking it would give him the most space to enter. He snapped off a branch from a tree he'd been meaning to trim and studied the window. Since he was barefoot, he needed a way to break the glass without injuring himself. He dragged 2 chairs from the back deck and placed them next to the window. He figured he could climb over the chairs to avoid the glass and then proceed cautiously once inside the family room. After a few deep breaths, he steeled himself for what was to come. Nick swung the branch into the family room window, which shattered with a satisfying crash. Unfortunately for him, the sound triggered the wailing alarm of the home security system. Even more unfortunate, a police cruiser happened to be passing down his street, as Maggie had called the local police station earlier to report possible break-ins in the neighborhood. Damn, Nick muttered under his breath as he hurriedly tried to climb over the chairs to shut off the infuriating security system. But it was too late. Police, stop right there and back away from the house slowly. Put your hands in the air, a commanding voice rang out. Nick glanced back to see 2 officers, both with their guns drawn. He complied, though he cut his feet slightly as he climbed off the chairs and backed away. Officers, I can explain, he began, but one of them promptly pulled his hands behind his back and cuffed him. Ignoring Nick's attempt at an explanation, the officer recited his Miranda rights and then asked if he had anything to say. Yes, this is my house, and I don't have my key, so I was breaking in to get some clothes and call my office, Nick blurted out. The officers eyed his sweatsuit outfit, their expressions perhaps suggesting they thought it comical. One of them asked for ID. No, I don't. You see, I lost my car and all my clothes and stuff, and I just need to get in so I can change, Nick explained hurriedly. How did you lose your car, sir? The officer inquired further. Well, I was staying at a friend's house last night, and this morning the car was gone, Nick replied, feeling the pressure. Just gone. Did you report the mysterious disappearance? Did you maybe leave it at a bar somewhere? The officer pressed. Nick was stuck. He didn't want to reveal his whereabouts or why he hadn't reported the car missing, but he also didn't want to end up in jail for trying to break into his own house. And those handcuffs were seriously uncomfortable. Then an idea struck him. You can call my wife. She can verify my identity, and maybe you could drive me to my office. I can get some help there to get some clothes, Nick suggested, knowing he'd face a lot of hassle at the car dealership, but it was better than jail or dealing with Maggie's wrath. One of the officers took Maggie's phone number from Nick and walked away to make the call. Nick overheard the officer's side of the conversation. Ma'am, this is Officer Riles with the Charlotte Police. He gave the address, and we have a man here who claims to be your husband. He was trying to break into your house because he lost his clothes. And yes, ma'am. No, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. We certainly will. Thank you, ma'am. The officer turned back to Nick. The lady says her husband is in Atlanta, and anyone breaking into her house must be a burglar. She hopes we put you in jail and throw away the key. But Nick was nearly in tears as the cops escorted him to their cruiser for the ride to the station. Meanwhile, Polly had driven to her office, albeit half a day late, but she would make it up. Still worried about James since she hadn't heard from him, she called his cell phone, but there was no answer. Then she called his office again. Hi, Stacy, Polly here again. I'm getting a little worried about James since I still haven't heard from him. Have you? No, I haven't. I suppose that means he's still in New York with the lawyers, but it's really unlike him not to have called. You sound a bit worried, so I'll call up there and check on him. Either he or I will call you back in a few minutes, okay? Thanks, Stacy. You're the best secretary in the world. A few minutes later, Polly received a call back. Polly, it's Stacy. I spoke to one of the secretaries in the law office, and she said James left late yesterday, hoping to catch the last flight down to Charlotte. So I called James's cell phone to check on him. I did speak with him, and he asked me to tell you he would call you later. Okay. Thank you, Stacy, thank you, said Polly as she disconnected. A snake started growing in the pit of her stomach. James ended his call with Stacy and disconnected. He was behind the wheel of his gold Mercedes en route to meet a new lawyer. This attorney came highly recommended by Fred Thomas, his trusted business lawyer of many years. James hoped he could place a similar level of trust in this new divorce lawyer. Mr. Turner, please take a seat. Ms. Coleman will be with you shortly, the receptionist informed him as he entered the lawyer's office. He settled into a chair, finding some solace in the office's decor, not extravagantly lavish, but certainly not cheap. Before he could dwell further on his thoughts, a woman in her 50s, with dyed red hair and a sturdy frame, entered the reception area. Mr. Turner, James stood and nodded. I'm Jenny Coleman. Fred asked me to take good care of you. Let's step into my office and discuss your situation. James followed her into a tastefully furnished office, accepted a cup of coffee from the receptionist, and began recounting his story, discovering his wife's infidelity, his desire for a divorce, and his need to safeguard his assets, particularly the proceeds from the sale of his and his sister's company. He chose not to mention the Mercedes, though he suspected Jenny might find it amusing. James, may I call you that? He nodded, and she continued, I'm Jenny. Here's the relatively good news, given your circumstances. Fred informed me that you and your sisters owned your company prior to your marriage, so your shares are considered separate property. This means your wife has no claim to your company shares or the sale proceeds. However, it's crucial to keep these shares and proceeds separate from any joint accounts you have with your wife. Understand? James nodded, absorbing the information. I think I understand, but what about our house, retirement accounts, and things like that? Well, the news isn't as good for you there. Since your income is significantly higher than hers, you'll be paying alimony for a few years. We might be able to forego touching your retirement accounts by increasing the alimony. I know it's not ideal, but dealing with some short-term discomfort now is better than risking having to split your retirement savings down the line. As for your kids, since they're in college, there's no need for child support. Are you okay with covering the rest of their college expenses? Yeah, that's fine. And what about the house? You and your wife will need to decide. You can either sell it and divide the proceeds, or one of you can buy out the other based on the current appraised value. After what I witnessed last night, I definitely don't want the house. I doubt Polly can afford to buy my half, so I suppose that means selling. All right, I can prepare the paperwork accordingly. The divorce petition is fairly standard, so I can have it ready for your review tomorrow, early if you prefer, so we can have her served by tomorrow afternoon. Then we can work on a proposed settlement agreement next week. That's pretty fast. Mr. Turner, James, listen to me. If there's a chance for you and your wife, if counseling or just some time might. No, it's just the shock I'm dealing with. Less than 24 hours ago, I was happy, eager to get home to my wife, share the good news about selling the company. And now I'm here discussing divorce filings. But go ahead. I'll figure out how to handle it. All right, but if you change your mind, just give me a call and we can make adjustments. James expressed his gratitude, paid a retainer, and exited her office. As he made his way back to the gold Mercedes, he couldn't shake off thoughts about the jerk he had seen the previous night. This reminded him that he had promised his secretary he would call Polly. Polly. Hello, Polly greeted as she answered her phone in her law firm office. Polly, it's James. You called, looking for me. Oh, James, thank you for calling. I've missed you. Where are you? I'm here in Charlotte, Polly. When did you get back? That familiar sensation of dread coiled in her stomach. Last night, Polly, I got back last night, and the dread tightened its grip. Polly sank back into her chair. She knew she had to keep this conversation going, but she could barely breathe, let alone speak. Polly, I'm hanging up now. No, James, no, she managed to squeak out. Please, can we meet somewhere? I need to see you and just be with you for a few minutes. James hesitated. This woman had been his love, the mother of his daughters, the most important person in his life for more than 20 years. Okay, Polly, Center Cafe at 6. The dread intensified. Polly had to agree, but Center Cafe held memories, where she and James had first met, both of them out with friends. It had become a special place for them over the years, and now she feared why James had suggested it, but she had to agree. James, I'll see you there, and please listen. I'm sorry, and I love you. James hung up. Polly sat there, tears flowing, the dread tightening its grip even more. Polly arrived at the cafe early, James not yet in sight. She ordered a glass of wine and sat, consumed by self-loathing. Her first real experiences had been with big, strong college soccer players. With them, she felt like a helpless victim, and oddly, she loved it. But when James came into her life, she decided she was done with feeling helpless. James was everything she needed. Strong, loving, a great father to their daughters, a good provider. Everything except for the occasional intrusive thought about one of those soccer players. That alone might have been manageable, if not for the recent flight to Charlotte from the West Coast. James had been visiting a pharmaceutical company trying to sell a new drug, and she had accompanied him for a getaway weekend before his meeting started. Flying back alone on an overnight flight, she had been seated next to a big man, a coach, as it turned out, for the local NFL team. They chatted, had too many drinks, and she fell asleep with her head on his shoulder, only to wake up in his arms. Reflecting on that night now, she realized she should have screamed or at least pushed his hand away. But no, Polly hadn't. The flight landed, and they headed straight to the nearest motel. As for guilt, she didn't remember feeling guilty, just relieved that James wouldn't return until later that week, giving her time to recover. The coach had only stayed in Charlotte for one season, and perhaps Polly would have returned to being a faithful wife if he hadn't introduced her to an offensive lineman on the practice squad before he left. Not a star, not even a starter, but just as strong and dominating in bed as the coach had been. Polly was almost thankful when he was traded away. She wanted to remain faithful to James, and guilt finally started to surface. Polly thought she was over her cheating by the time their girls left for college. She dearly loved James, and she enjoyed the extra time they had for just the two of them with the girls gone. But that snake of temptation reared its head whenever James did something nice for her. Like when he told her it was time for her to get a new car, a luxury car that she should choose. Unfortunately, she chose to go to the Mercedes dealership, where she met Nick Peterson. He didn't sell her a Mercedes, but he certainly knew how to push all the right buttons to get her into bed. She knew it was wrong, because Nick wasn't all that great. He was big and strong, and she liked him, but James was better at everything. It was also wrong simply because it was wrong. She had gotten away with previous affairs and had thought her marriage was intact. But now, she and James loved each other more than ever, and she wanted to be faithful. It was the right thing to do, not to have an affair with a big oaf. Letting Nick spend the night in her marital bed had been a terrible mistake, even if James hadn't discovered them. But she had let him, and now she was terrified of the terrible price she might have to pay. "Hello, Polly," James greeted as Polly looked up to see him standing there. He appeared noticeably older than when he had left for New York, and she couldn't help but feel responsible for that. The familiar sensation of unease slithered in her belly. "Hi, James. Thank you for being here. I don't even know where to begin in expressing how sorry I am." "May I ask you some questions?" he said, taking a seat. "Oh, James, please no. If we have any chance, questions and answers will just destroy it. James, we should escape, just for a few days, to some island in the Caribbean, where we can reconnect, hold each other, where..." "Polly, please, don't be delusional. If you can't answer my questions, I'll leave now." The snake kept biting, but Polly knew she had to endure that pain and let James vent. Perhaps, just perhaps, he could move past his anger towards reconciliation. "Okay, James, ask me anything." "Do you know what time I got home last night?" It was a peculiar question, she thought. No, not exactly. It had to be after. She stopped herself. She knew what his next question would be, and it was, "And do you know what I saw when I got home, when I walked upstairs to our bedroom, or I should say, what used to be our bedroom?" "Yes, James, I understand what you must have seen, and I know it must have been one of the most terrible things you've ever witnessed, and I know it's entirely my fault. Please just hear me out. James, I am so sorry enough that I won't contest any divorce you want. If you want to yell at me, you can do it right here, and I won't protest. If you want to..." "Shut up, Polly. Next question. How many men since we got married?" "If you lie, if I even suspect you're lying, I'm leaving." Polly's initial instinct was to lie. Her second thought was that lying was too risky, and her third thought was that her marriage was likely already over. "3, James, just 3 men that I wish I'd never met. I can see in your eyes that our marriage is finished, and I accept that. You deserve someone better than me. I'm willing to do almost anything for another chance, but I understand if you want nothing more to do with me." "Get a lawyer, Polly. You'll be served with divorce papers tomorrow." James stood and walked away. Polly sat there, too stunned to cry at first. As she processed James's words, the snake in her gut bit hard, and tears finally came. James left the cafe, reminiscing about how he and Polly first met there decades ago. He wondered if this recent meeting would mark the end of any meaningful conversation between them. Intimacy, he thought bitterly, the cruelest kind. Hearing your wife admit she's seeing other men. And seeing her with that toad Nick in our bed, asleep, her snoring for God's sake. How could I ever move past that? Maybe he could have dealt with 3 anonymous affairs over their 20-plus years together, with counseling and lots of apologies on her part. Maybe. But he couldn't shake that image from their bed. Their marriage was finished, and as he sat in that cursed gold Mercedes, he finally let himself cry. As darkness fell, James realized how late it was. He blew his nose, wiped his face, and thought about what Maggie Peterson had said earlier, though it felt like ages ago. She had warned him not to send her pictures of Polly with her husband. She knew forgiveness would be much harder if faced with visual proof. James decided to call her, to share his thoughts and check on the Mercedes. "Hello?" Maggie answered her home phone. "Maggie, it's James Turner from earlier today. I just wanted to check in on how you're doing and see what I should do with the car." "James, thanks for calling. I'm managing, I suppose. You can hang onto the car for now. Nick's in a heap of trouble, so he won't be needing it anytime soon. Trouble? I hope you didn't resort to drastic measures. No, but he might be wishing I did. He got himself arrested for trying to break into our house, and apparently he took a swing at one of the officers. You know how big he is. The cop ended up tasering him. Then something happened while he was in jail. He won't talk about it, but I suspect he may have been assaulted by another inmate. I refused to speak with him, and he eventually had to call his brother to bail him out. Now his whole family knows what's happened. Wow. Maggie, I can't say I feel sorry for him, but I am sorry for what you're going through. I want to commend you on your decision this morning not to look at those pictures of him and my wife. If there's any chance of reconciliation, those images would only complicate things further. Yeah, he finally arrived home a couple of hours ago, in tears, apologizing and begging me to let him stay, at least for now. You know we have 2 young kids, so I'm going to try to work through this, but it won't be smooth sailing for him. His own brother, who's a lawyer, advised me to insist on a post-nup agreement, and he offered to help with it. Plus, I'll be managing our finances, at least for the time being. Nick is going to be closely watched, and I won't hesitate to rein him in. Good for you, girl. I wish you all the best, and when you need the car back, just let me know. They ended the call, and James sat there, feeling a tinge of envy towards Maggie. Perhaps Nick had finally learned his lesson. Getting arrested and facing an assault charge for attempting to hit a policeman, along with whatever he went through in jail, might have straightened him out. James hoped so, for Maggie's and their children's sake. He eventually drove back to the motel where he was staying. He had one more task before attempting to sleep, calling his daughters, Judy and Julia. "Hi, Daddy," Judy, he presumed answered. They were twins, fraternal, not identical, but they might as well have been. They sounded alike, attended the same very expensive college, studying the same thing, nursing. At least they didn't look completely alike. They were close and obviously sisters, but not so obviously twins. James often admitted, only to himself, that he was glad they weren't identical. They were experts at teaming up on him, and he thought it would be even worse if 2 identical young women were working him to get a car, permission to stay out late, money for a trip to Florida for spring break, whatever the daddy please request of the day was. But he also admitted, again only to himself, that he loved to spoil them. "Judy," he replied. "Yep, you got it." Of course, it was a 50-50th chance. What's up? "Listen, tomorrow is Saturday, and I'd like to take you and your sister out for brunch. Well, let's call it brunch, maybe around 11 o'clock. At that bistro on 4th Street where we've been before." That sounds good to me. Hold on a sec. He could hear noises in the background, then she was back. "And it's good with Julia too, can we?" He quickly cut her off, remembering their last brunch had included 6 or 7 of their friends. "Let's just make it the 3 of us tomorrow, okay?" "Sure," Judy replied, "but tell me what's..." Once again, he interrupted, not wanting to have a difficult conversation over the phone that would be better in person. "Listen, I need to run. See you at 11. Love you, and tell your sister I love her too. Bye," and he hung up. He hoped she wouldn't call Polly, but he couldn't have told her that. She would have called Polly right away. 11 o'clock tomorrow morning would come quickly enough. Polly. After James departed from the cafe, leaving her with his advice, warning, or perhaps a curse, Polly found it difficult to stop her tears. She realized she had ruined everything: her marriage, her family, her entire life. She knew her daughters would eventually find out, her parents, all her friends. She would likely lose her home and even James himself. Poor James, to have walked in on her in bed, naked, probably with that damned Nick sporting an erection. The image must have shattered James, and Polly's tears flowed unabated. A waitress finally approached and inquired if she needed to move to the ladies' room. Polly stifled her sobs and managed a weak "no, thank you." She settled the bill and left, heading towards the place that soon wouldn't be her home anymore. Upon arrival, she found some gin, though the quantity was all wrong. Not enough to knock her out, but too much to help her rationalize how to win James back. After she consumed it all, it did help her fall asleep, clinging to a hope for some sort of miracle to bring James back to her. James and his daughters. At 11 the next morning, James sat in the bistro waiting for his daughters to arrive. Earlier that morning, he had reviewed and approved the draft divorce petition, then driven 2 hours from Charlotte, contemplating how to break the news to Judy and Julia. As they walked in, he prepared himself for the difficult conversation ahead. After the usual greetings and small talk, James finally broached the subject. "Girls, I have something important to tell you," he began. "It's not about illness or anything physical, but it's not good news either." Julia, perceptive as always, jumped in. "Is it about Mom? Did she do something?" James sighed, steeling himself. "Yes, it's about your mom. She cheated on me." Judy's reaction was immediate. "Oh my God, is she running off with someone from her firm? Some young guy?" The absurdity momentarily lightened the mood, but James' somber expression quickly brought them back to reality. "Daddy, no, not Mom," Julia choked out, tears welling in her eyes. James took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "Girls, listen carefully. Yes, your mom has cheated on me, but it doesn't mean she's cheated on you." Julia's voice trembled as she responded, "But if her cheating is tearing our family apart, then she's cheating on all of us." Tears streamed down all their faces as they tried to comfort each other, realizing the painful truth of Julia's words. They embraced, clinging to each other for support in the face of their shattered family. "Dad, let's leave," Judy suggested. "There's a park a couple of blocks away. We'll have more privacy there." Sensing the stares, James swiftly settled the bill, and they made their way to the park, Judy and Julia flanking him, all holding onto each other. "Tell us, Daddy," Judy said as they settled on a bench. "We deserve to know how bad this is." "She's right," Julia added. "We're old enough to handle it." "On my way here, I struggled with what to say," James began. "I agree, you're both grown up, and yes, your mom did cheat on all of us. I'm afraid I found her in our bed at home with another man, and she later admitted there had been others before him. I'm still in shock, but I know your mom and I can't recover from this. I've already spoken to a divorce lawyer, and your mom will be served with divorce papers later today." Tears welled up, and then there was silence as they all absorbed the news and contemplated their futures. "Girls, as difficult as this situation is, your priority needs to be yourselves and your schoolwork. There's enough money to cover your senior year here at Duke, and if either or both of you want to pursue graduate studies, I believe I can find the funds for that too. But there's a condition attached." Both girls looked at him, curious about what he meant. "I'm happy to support your education, but I expect hard work and good grades from both of you. Yes, what your mom has done makes focusing on school harder, but you've told me you're adults, and real adults, mature and disciplined people, can handle adversity like this. Right?" They glanced at each other, tears welling up as they hugged him again. "Yes, Daddy, you're the best, and we absolutely, positively won't let you down," Julia reassured him, while Judy appeared pensive. "Daddy, Julia's right, we won't let you down. But what about you? Are you going to be okay? What are you going to do?" "Well, you can do a lot of thinking during a 2-hour drive. First, I want both of you to know that what you've said doesn't surprise me one bit. I know you'll continue to excel in school, and I'll always be proud of you. As for me, what your mom has done has really knocked me down. I could hide away, wallow in self-pity, try to find a way to reconcile with your mom. But I realized that's not taking care of me. All my adult life, I've been taking care of other people. I started working at your grandparents' company, looking after them. Then, after they passed away, I took care of my sisters since they owned interests in the company. Then there's your mom, and of course, taking care of you guys. It might sound like I'm complaining, but I'm not really. The company will be sold soon, which relieves me of my responsibilities to my sisters. Polly is gone, and you guys. I promise I'm happy to take care of you, to help you start your adult lives. So that's 2 out of 3 in terms of women in my life. Not bad at all. That leaves me, and you know what? I'm looking at this whole cheating and divorce thing not as the worst thing in my life, but as a chance for a new life. A whole new life devoted to taking care of one person, me. Okay. Dad, Really? I mean, if you really mean what you're saying, that's great, said Julia, hopeful. Judy was a little more skeptical. Dad, what does all that really mean? A new life? What, working for another pharma company? Buying a farm? What? That's a great question, and I've got a solid answer. No specifics yet, but this new chapter is going to be all about physicality. Running marathons, scaling mountains, sailing across the Atlantic, trekking the Alps, embarking on safaris. There's a world of possibilities out there. And you know what? Along the way, I might just meet a fascinating woman, someone who shares my adventurous spirit. Who knows? Wow, Dad, that's incredible. Both girls stared at him, astonished. This was their dad, not some daring explorer. Did you really come up with all this on the drive from Charlotte? Judy asked. Well, partly yes, but also I haven't slept much, and my mind's been racing, brainstorming different ideas. I could easily drown my sorrows in a bottle, but instead, I'm choosing to make the most out of this situation. Trust me, I'm going to be all right. With more hugs, kisses, and a few more tears, James bid farewell to his daughters, heading back to Charlotte in the gold Mercedes. Polly and the daughters. After James departed, the girls immediately called their mother. The phone was answered by a scratchy voice at the Turners' residence. Putting the call on speaker, Julia began, "Mom, it's Julia and Judy. Daddy just informed us about something terrible during our brunch." Their mother responded, "What did he tell you?" Julia continued, "Well, the word divorce came up, and he mentioned that your infidelity was the reason." Dad provided more details, but essentially, that's the gist of it. Is it true? Their mother hesitated before replying. It's complicated. Your father and I have been married for so long, and this mistake, yes, I've made a mistake, well, more than one. But we can work through this. I just need to give your dad some time to. Julia interjected, "Mom, listen. Dad mentioned divorce. He wasn't talking about fixing a mistake. He was talking about infidelity." Their mother responded, "Yes, technically, he's right. But that doesn't mean we can't fix this. I told him I would do anything." Judy cut in, "Mom, I think he may be in denial. Dad said he consulted a divorce lawyer. It seems like he doesn't see a way back for both of you. Julia, and I don't want to choose sides, but you need to face the reality." There was a strained silence on the other end of the line as Julia and Judy exchanged concerned looks. Did they need to make the drive to Charlotte? Polly finally spoke, barely above a whisper, "I know. I know I've made a mess, destroyed my marriage. I think your dad hates me, and he's right to feel that way. I've done terrible things. Your dad told me to get a lawyer, and he's right about that too. I'm sorry, girls. I understand this is difficult for you as well." "Mom, don't worry about us," Julia reassured her. "We'll be okay, and I believe Dad is handling things the best he can. You need to focus on yourself. Getting a lawyer is a good step. Judy and I can drive over to Charlotte if you need us." "Thank you, girls. That means a lot. I'll manage. I just need some time to come to terms with my actions." The call ended, leaving the girls uncertain of their next move. "You know," remarked Julia, "it's ironic, in a sad way, how we're more concerned about Mom, who caused this mess, than we are about Dad." They continued their discussion, eventually deciding to give their parents space to sort things out without interference from their daughters. Polly sat in her Charlotte home, feeling a bit hungover from gin the previous night and deeply despondent after speaking with her daughters. She knew she should get up, get dressed, and do something productive. "Do something," she urged herself. Just then, the doorbell rang, distracting her from thoughts of another round of gin. When Polly opened the door, she was greeted by a young woman who was visibly chewing gum. "Can I help you?" Polly inquired. "Yes, ma'am. Are you Polly Turner, the wife of James Turner?" "Why, yes, I am." "Why do you ask?" Polly questioned. "Ma'am, you have been served," the woman stated as she handed Polly a folder of documents and took a photo of her. "What? What?" Polly stammered as the woman retreated to her car. Returning inside, Polly sat at the kitchen table and cautiously opened the folder. As she read the title of the first document, Petition for Divorce, Polly felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. Recalling James's parting words, get a lawyer. She knew that their marriage was irreparably damaged. Sitting in the familiar kitchen they once shared, Polly understood that there was no way back from the mistakes she had made. The future. Polly's infidelity had indeed taken its toll on her marriage with James. 6 years later, seated in the grand ballroom of a luxurious hotel, she watched Judy twirl around with her new spouse, lost in memories of the past. When her daughters were teenagers, Polly had believed life was unbearable, with a flurry of activities, teenage drama, and her perception of boys as either too mean or too kind. James was always occupied. Her paralegal work felt tedious, and life seemed overwhelming at the time. Now she longed for those chaotic days. Despite still working at the same law firm, drowning in mundane paperwork, she yearned for something more. "Polly, here's your wine," Simon, her date, offered as he approached. Simon was a kind, middle-aged lawyer attending Judy's wedding with her. "Your daughter looks stunning, just like her mother." "Thank you, Simon. You're too kind, and thanks for the wine," Polly replied with a smile. Simon was a pleasant man, and she could picture herself settling down with him if he so desired. However, he wasn't James. Her eyes scanned the room, landing on James, who had recently returned from a climbing expedition in Nepal. He exuded a bronzed, godlike aura, appearing more handsome and fit than she remembered. He shared laughter and warmth with Julia and her partner, holding hands with a stunning and athletic woman by his side. Julia had mentioned that James had met this woman during another climbing excursion in South America, and they had been exploring and climbing together for months. The mere thought made Polly nauseous. "Polly." Simon's voice pulled Polly out of her daze. "Yes, Simon," she responded. "Polly, I think it's time we leave. Your duties as the mother of the bride have been fulfilled, and staying here fixated on your ex-husband isn't healthy for either of us. It's not conducive to whatever relationship is blossoming between us," Simon gently suggested. "Simon, you're so thoughtful, and you're absolutely right. Let me bid farewell to my daughters, and we'll make our exit," Polly agreed. She embraced and kissed her daughters, offered her best wishes to the newlyweds, and made a conscious effort to ignore James and his attractive companion. James caught a glimpse of Polly as she made her way out of the ballroom, stirring a pang of nostalgia for their past. Julia interrupted his thoughts with a question. "Sorry, Julia, what were you saying?" James inquired. "Daddy, do you remember that odd gold Mercedes you drove to have brunch with Judy and me at Duke that morning?" Julia asked curiously. "Whatever happened to that car?" "Ah, Julia, that's a long tale I won't bore you with. I borrowed that peculiar gold Mercedes from a friend and eventually returned it to her. I believe she sold it. It was indeed a car plagued by bad luck," James explained before turning back to his climbing companion, discussing their upcoming mountain adventure. Thank you for watching this video to the end. If you liked it, please like it and subscribe to the channel. See you soon.